Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy who? Jimmy who?
I don't know who he is.
Before becoming a president, Jimmy Carter was a Georgia farmer. His father gave him 1 acre of land, which Carter used to grow and sell peanuts. He was in the Naval Academy from 1943 to 1953. One of his most trusted advisors was Zbigniew Brzezinski, his national security advisor, who was highly trusted by multiple presidents. Carter's political career began as he served 2 terms as Georgia state senator and 1 as governor of Georgia. He was elected president in 1976 as a member of the Democratic Party.
In the past, we had gone to bed with the military dictatorships all over South America, Latin America, and Central America, and so forth. I decided that we should reverse that policy.
Carter believed that the nation's foreign policy should reflect its highest moral principles. He wanted to do so by taking the lead in promoting universal human rights. He also believed in the rule of law in international affairs and in the principle of self-determination for all people. He wanted to continue to improve the U.S.-USSR relations and reduce Cold War tensions. Carter said, "Our policy is rooted in our moral values." In 1904, Teddy Roosevelt was granted permission to occupy and use the Panama Canal region. Anti-American riots and protests in Panama led to questioning of U.S. control, and in 1964, the U.S. negotiated the future of the canal. The U.S. agreed to provide Panamanian control over the canal by 1999. In 1977, Carter completed negotiations that had begun under Johnson's administration and signed a treaty that would slowly restore the canal to Panama. Carter is criticized by some as he is seen as being weak and giving away the Panama Canal. The canal was a major strategic pathway, and 3/4 of Americans opposed the measure. On September 17, 1978, Carter invited Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egypt's President Anwar Sadat to Camp David, a rural presidential retreat outside Washington, to discuss the continual conflict between the 2 nations. Carter shuttled between Israel and Egyptian delegations. The 2 sides agreed that Israel would withdraw from the entire Sinai Peninsula. The U.S. would establish monitoring posts to ensure that neither side attacked the other. Israel and Egypt would recognize each other's governments and sign a peace treaty, and Israel pledged to negotiate with Palestinians for peace. It can be argued that the Camp David Accords, signed in Washington on March 26, 1979, were the most significant foreign policy achievement of the Carter administration.
It is a deliberate effort of a powerful atheistic government to subjugate an independent Islamic people.
Increasingly heavy air attacks softened up the guerrillas' positions.
The Soviet invasion was a major threat to U.S. and Western oil reserves, as well as U.S. interest. Carter responded to them by cutting off grain sales to the Soviet Union and ordered a boycott of the 1980 Moscow Summer Olympic Games by U.S. athletes. Secretly, the CIA spent $3 billion arming the Mujahideen, which are radical Islamists who declare jihad. The public considered this to be more punitive towards the American swimmers and runners than the Soviet leaders. Carter's ineffective response only reinforced his weak image.
I, as President, am entrusted with the security of the United States of America. I would never take any action that would jeopardize that sacred trust. President Brezhnev, you and I both have children and grandchildren, and we want them to live, and to live in peace.
SALT II, the second Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, banned new missile programs. However, due to the Soviet leader Brezhnev's invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 and the discovery of a Soviet combat brigade in Cuba, the U.S. Senate refused to ratify the treaty. That being said, they both still unofficially followed the agreement.
I continue to share with all of you the sense of outrage and impatience because of the kidnapping of innocent American hostages and the holding of them by militant terrorists with the support and the approval of Iranian officials.
The Iran hostage crisis was a diplomatic crisis between Iran and the United States. 52 American diplomats and citizens were held hostage for 444 days. This was from November 4th, 1979 to January 20th, 1981. The CIA overthrew an anti-West Mossadegh government in 1951 and installed the Shah, a tyrannical leader. Radical Islamists overthrew him in 1979. When the U.S. gave asylum to exiled Shah, students attacked the American embassy in Tehran. Carter said that the United States will not yield to blackmail. Carter's responses and solutions were disasters, and it is seen as a major failure for Carter.
The United States of America and the People's Republic of China have agreed to recognize each other and to establish diplomatic relations as of January the 1st, 1979.
Carter granted the communist regime in China formal diplomatic recognition on January 1st, 1979. Carter unilaterally revoked the 1955 Mutual Defense Treaty with the Republic of China, effective January 1st, 1980. The action was unsuccessfully challenged by the Republicans. Beneficial trade relations were established between China and the U.S., leading to huge imports of finished consumer goods from China, in return for U.S. lumber and foodstuffs. The U.S. continued to supply arms to Taiwan to defend itself for the mainland, a step that kept some friction in U.S.-China relations, but allowed the U.S. to maintain quasi-diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Hardliners saw this as a weakness. Historian Joshua Moravchik recognizes the benefits of Carter's support for human rights. However, he is critical of Carter's ability to carry out that policy. He said, "The good that the Carter policy did for the idea of human rights by broadcasting it must be weighed against the harm it did by contributing to the miasma that surrounds the term." Historian A. Glenn Maurer believed that Carter should not be judged on his inability to carry out his ideals. He praises him as the pioneer president in advocating for human rights and incorporating them into the greater scope of his foreign policy. He says Carter established precedents for the future presidents to advocate for human rights. Historian Donald Spencer believed that Carter was overly idealistic and naive. He feels that Carter deserves harsh criticism and said presidents must be judged by their achievements in protecting American interests at home and abroad, not by their dreams. Historian Gaddis Smith believes that he had ineffective and incompetent foreign policy plans, but did do some good for the world.
Jimmy Carter was someone who was very idealistic, wanted to do the right thing, but I felt like he never had the kind of pragmatic political sense that you need in order to negotiate the power centers that you have to negotiate in Washington if you're going to get anything done.
What we did was keep our country at peace, protected my nation's interest, and promoted human rights and freedom around the world.